Hi, everyone. I'm Keith Stone with the Center for Hellenic Studies for another installment of a CHS dialogue, which is also HeroesX office hours. And we were just talking about the Phaeacians, which is one of this week's questions from associated with hour 10. And I'll read the question quickly. Can you imagine an Odyssey that did not tell about the stay of Odysseus in the realm of King Alcinous and his Phaeacians? And we differed on that. Greg was saying probably not. We were summarizing some of the responses that people gave. They were explaining how important the Phaeacians are in different ways. Geographical connections, narrative connections.
Yeah.
I'm not sure really anybody said that you could skip that episode, actually, now that I'm thinking.
Good. It's not that I'm saying good because I think that it's simply true that the Phaeacians are vitally important for the Odyssey as we have it, and maybe for other Odysseys that we don't have. But I do think, without saying right or wrong, that they're just so important for the development of the plot. We wouldn't really understand the position of Odysseus with respect to his past in Troy or in Iliadic traditions if there were no opportunity to unpack all of those things, as happens in especially Odyssey 8.
Right. Who would Odysseus be telling those things to, if not to
the
Phaeacians?
Yes.
Calypso? Doesn't seem quite right for him to be
no,
acting like a bard to Calypso.
No, there's no reception there. Calypso is in the middle of nowhere. Now you could counter, well, Phaeacians are in the middle of nowhere as well. But I would say not quite. They're at a point that is equidistant from the mythical past and the historical present. By historical, I mean the present as perceived by Greek-speaking people in the 8th, 7th, 6th, 5th centuries. I'll add 4th.
Yeah, to get out of, what is it? How do you pronounce Calypso's island?
Gugier is the way it is. I've never tried it in English. Never, and maybe I can go through life never saying in English pronunciation.
So, but Odysseus has to die to get out of there, right? I mean, he has to. There's no like real connection between that island and known worlds. He's on a raft that breaks apart in a storm. Who knows where he ends up? He has to basically die.
It's
kind of metaphorically drowned and come back to life.
It really is not a midpoint for anything. It's an off point. I remember, what was that that place called in the movie version of Philip K. Dick's work, Off-World. It's Off-World.
I don't know that one.
But could I say something about the land of the Phaeacians, the island of the Phaeacians? I think it's pretty clear that it's an island. It amazes me that a hyper-rational personality like Thucydides, who is often considered a kind of super positivistic antidote to Herodotus, the earlier historian, Thucydides actually buys into the idea that the people of the island of Corcyra, aka Kerkyra, which is the more ancient Greek form, and aka Corfu, which is the Venetian form, and which is how most people who are not Greeks recognize that island. Anyway, Thucydides accepts the tradition that King Alcinous, aka Alcinous, was the king of the Phaeacians as located on the island of Corfu. How's that? Not only that, but that he had a hero cult there. And there are references to the actual place where Alkinoos was worshipped as a cult hero. So I worked on this in a paper that went on and on and on, and I don't want to inflict it on our participants now, but the basic message of the paper was that for the people of the island of Corfu, it made sense for the land of the Phaeacians to be their land, that the Phaeacians' island is the Corcyraeans' island, the island of Corfu. But for other political constituencies of Homeric reception, especially Athenians, that would be very counterproductive for them, because what they would want is for that particular island, at least at various stages of Athenian ideology, to have nothing to do with the Phaeacians. And so the Athenian version of Homeric reception would actually push for an island that simply stops making any communication with the world of the present, and what we, looking backwards, would call the 8th, 7th, 6th, 5th, 4th centuries, and that it was simply locked away, hermetically sealed from, let's call the so-called present, the historical world, and it was stuck in the world of myth. How? Because as we read in the Odyssey, Poseidon, in order to punish the Phaeacians for making it possible for Odysseus to get back to Ithaca, as punishment, he asked Zeus to make it possible for a gigantic mountain to seal off the harbor of the Phaeacians, so that they're really shut off from not just the rest of the world locally, but also the rest of time temporally. How's that?
Why don't the Athenians want the Corcyraeans, I guess, to be Phaeacia? What did it?
Well, because that would promote the propaganda of that part of the Greek world, that they are direct heirs to the epic heritage of Homeric poetry, and references like that, references that would point to something that is politically advantageous to any group in the present, would be, I won't say censored, because that's not the right word when you talk about an evolving oral tradition that tends to be centralized, but let's say occluded or shaded over. When you really think about it, there are not that many references anywhere in the Homeric Iliad or Odyssey to places that would references that would promote the political interests of those places in a major way. Sure, there are occasional references to Athens itself, but usually in peripheral context. By peripheral, I mean situations where the reference to Athens does not directly affect the plot of either the Iliad or the Odyssey.
Right, or like the catalog of ships. I mean, everybody's in there, so it kind of
everybody's in there, and so sure, there's a really nice plug for Athens, but there are nice plugs for other places as well. And even there, it's the kind of plugging, it's the kind of promoting that doesn't really create a big political advantage to any of the famous places mentioned.
So, Greg, maybe I could pick up on a couple of other things that our participants have been talking about, and that is the actual narration that Odysseus himself makes. There's a whole chunk of, as it were, of the plot,
Yes.
that his own personal backstory that we wouldn't otherwise hear about. And actually, in another thread, not related to your question, but I think related to this issue, is how reliable is his narration as well.
Yes. Well, I would say it would have to be fairly reliable. Let's start with the second part of the question, simply because if there is distortion of traditions that most people in the transmission of Homeric poetry would accept, then frankly, the Odyssey would be unacceptable. These epic traditions have to be politically sound and politically sensitive to the major issues, even if these issues aren't spelled out. So that's answer to the second part of your question. With regard to the first part, that's a bit trickier. Could I try to address it in terms of what actually happens, especially in Odyssey 8? And if this is going off track as far as the question is concerned, please, let's come back to it. But what I really want to stress, and I don't stress it that much in the book, Ancient Greek Hero in 24 Hours, but I do stress it in another book called Homer the Pre-Classic. I think that what's happening in Odyssey 8 is a kind of survey of almost every kind of poetic tradition that rivals or blends with Homeric poetic tradition. That includes Homeric hymns. I'm thinking of the second song of Demodocus, which is, I think, maybe the most conservative, even though it's ribald and seemingly playful. Some people think it's the newest part of Odyssey 8. I think it's the oldest part. But there you have, I think, an example of a Homeric hymn that is an older version. If you look at the first song of Demodocus and the third song, what you seem to be seeing there is a form of epic. By epic, I mean a grandiose narration of heroic deeds, a form of epic that is less akin to the Iliad and Odyssey and more akin to the epic cycle. And okay, we don't have the epic cycle attested in its entirety or even in significant fragments. But even from the plot outlines, we can see that the Homeric cycle is a very different animal when it comes to epic. That cycle and versus Iliad and Odyssey are very different kinds of epic. For one thing, in the cycle, it's conventional to stop more often in the narrative and then fast forward and skip things and then start again and then stop and then fast forward again. And every time you fast forward, there has to be an adjustment made because of all the things you skip. Compare that to the Homeric Iliad and the Odyssey, where there's a pretty consistent line of narrative that goes from A to Z. And so when you study all of these different variations and different ways you can tell the story of Troy even, and that comes out very clearly in the third song of Demodocus, where we actually hear about the wooden horse, something we never hear about in our Iliad. Wow, you see a very different world of epic and almost a different ethos. By ethos, I mean where people even behave in significantly different ways. Now, looping back to your question, I know I haven't quite addressed that first part of your question. So why don't you help me fine tune it so I can, the question, and now fine tune the answer a little more.
Could I just pick up on something you were saying, though, about the sort of almost the logic of the narrative? In Odyssey, we actually have a rather going forward, going back, much like the journey of Odysseus himself.
Yes.
You get
Yes.
Which we touch on in our other discussion question for hour 9, which is the first few lines of the Odyssey.
Well
and how
said.
that sets it up. But then we're expecting to hear the story of Odysseus, perhaps from Troy or perhaps to the point he's at. And we don't. We get to the Telemachy, and then we get a bit of narrative about Odysseus.
Yes.
Then we get him on Phaeacia, and that's where we get this other narrative, which then goes further back. And so it then draws all the threads together before we can move forward.
Beautiful. And what you just said, and you very kindly framed it as if it were a side question, answers directly the first part of your question, which I didn't really answer directly. So I think we're making progress here. Thank you.
I was wondering, looking at some of the participants' questions,
Yes.
does his stay with the Phaeacians, does it allow Odysseus to reconnect with his identity, but his identity that probably he kind of forgot a little bit when he was staying at Calypso's? So he goes back to his identity from the point when he was at Troy.
Yes.
And the Phaeacians allow that to happen.
I like that point very much, and it really comes home when he breaks down and cries the second time. He weeps, hearing about the destruction of Troy. And as you, my friends, know, I make the argument that one very questionable moment in the narrative arc about Odysseus and his adventures at Troy is what he is said to have done to the family of Hector. After all is said and done, Troy is captured, Andromache is now a prisoner. But what happens to baby Astyanax? And in the cycle, we know that at least one way to see what happens is that Odysseus himself throws the child of Hector and Andromache from a high point on the walls of Troy, throws the little boy to his death. And that's something that is not narrated in Odyssey 8 by the blind singer Demodocus when Demodocus sings his third song, but it's almost narrated. In other words, even from the plot outlines that we have the cycle, at exactly the point in the capture of Troy's story where Odysseus would be executing the child of Hector and Andromache, at that point he suddenly starts crying, and then instead of a paraphrase that continues the narrative, what the narrative does is compare the crying of Odysseus to the crying of a captive woman whose family has been killed and who is mourning her husband, ... And you say, my goodness, that's exactly like Andromache. It's what Andromache would be doing at that point. The Homeric Odyssey, or shall I say the narrative embedded in the Homeric Odyssey, never tells that story. Instead, it tells you how Odysseus, listening to a story from that point onward, starts weeping. And then by way of simile, that is to say, by way of comparison, then retells a story that could be applied to Andromache. Very sophisticated, very indicative of the way Homeric poetry can refer to, if you like, allude to moments in the cycle without giving it away completely, so to speak. I see that throughout the Iliad and the Odyssey, and maybe in Odyssey 8 is where I see it most clearly. So that's what inspired me to ask that question here for hour 10. And that is, do we really need the Phaeacians? Well, I think we really need them as the receivers and transmitters of the stories that are being told, not only by Odysseus, which the stories go 9, 10, 11, 12, 4 rhapsodies, but also the stories told or performances performed by Demodocus in Odyssey 8, preceding 9, 10, 11, 12. This is Rhapsody 8. And all of this couldn't happen without the Phaeacians. So,
Yeah.
my goodness, I think they're, at least from the Homeric point of view, they're integral. I'm willing to leave the door open that if we never had a Homeric Odyssey, then maybe we wouldn't miss the Phaeacians. And to that extent, maybe the Phaeacians are important only to the Homeric Odyssey. But I can't prove it. I think that the Phaeacians had a similar role, a similar kind of in-between role, even outside of the tradition that we call Homeric tradition, the tradition that produced, that created ultimately the Homeric Iliad and Odyssey.
Also, when Odysseus goes to Phaeacia, this is an ideal kingdom, very fertile, beautiful. And he needs to connect to Arete, Queen Arete, yes. Not only the king. You know, in a way, he needs to connect to his wife Penelope, yes. For his homecoming. Do you think this is his purification journey to become going back home? He needs to cry. This is the place he cries.
Yes. Beautiful. You know, you said so many things that I don't even know where to start. Maybe I start with your earlier point about the need to connect with Queen Arete, and then I'll try to wind up what I say by referring to your last point about the need to cry, the need to weep, to warm, to mourn, to literally perform lament. So about Arete, I cannot talk about Arete without paying tribute to the pioneering, path-breaking work of Douglas Frame, who shows that Queen Arete, Princess Nausicaa, and even King Alkinoos are all, may I put it this way, Doug wouldn't say it this way, but I'm saying it this way, maybe being reductionist, placeholders for agenda that have to do with the development of epic in Asia Minor, especially among the 12 cities that called themselves the Ionian Dodecapolis, the confederation of 12 cities. And as Doug shows, between the late 8th and early 7th centuries, there was a very strong impetus for the development of the outlines of the Odyssey pretty much as we know them today, and for the outlines of the Iliad as well. Very interesting work. How can I summarize what Doug says in almost 1,000 pages of a beautiful book called Hippota, Nestor? I can't, but you certainly were pointing me, I think, in a very creative direction with your question about Arete, which literally means she who must be prayed to, which of course immediately conjures in our mind, well, who is the goddess that we must pray to, since this is a feminine noun? Well, of course, it's Athena. But I'll stop there. Let me go to your final point. And I know you raised other points as well, but I'm going to stick to point A and point Z of the many things you said, you asked about. The need to cry, the need to have an occasion to lament. I think this is so important to Homeric poetry, which signals not only here, but also already in Odyssey 4, that an epic that shows no empathy towards those who suffer in war is an epic that is devoid of moral values. And I leave you with this thought. There's that beautiful moment when Helen wants to tell her own version of the Trojan War story, and something that she says should be enjoyable as entertainment for people who are listening to epic in the context of a dinner or a banquet. And in order for that kind of epic to be performed, she pours into the drinks of Menelaus, Telemachus, and all those people who are there, all of whom have all sorts of emotional ties to what happened at Troy. She pours into their drinks of wine a drug called nepenthes, which means literally anti-penthos, negating penthos. And as we've already seen, penthos is the programmatic word used in Homeric poetry to refer to lament. It's not just sorrow, which is the way some people translate it, sorrow, grief, penthos. Ditto for achos. It's not just that. It's not just the emotion of grief, sorrow. It's the expression of this emotion by way of both crying and singing and crying, which is, of course, what lament is all about. So, wow, I think you really said it. The need to cry, the need to weep, the need to experience lament, crying and singing and crying. And that's what it all comes down to. And the opportunity is given when Odysseus himself challenges the blind singer of the Phaeacians to sing a song about the wooden horse. And that sounds entertaining, doesn't it? But in the end, that song about the wooden horse, it turns out to be really a song, more importantly, of suffering, of what a widow feels in the wake of a terrifying war, and the degradations that the innocent have to undergo, and all those other things that not just invite but compel an expression of sorrow by way of lament. And when that's embedded in epic, then that makes epic a much more noble medium than the way I think people misunderstand epic as a kind of macho exercise in people killing each other, and what fun. It's so much more than that. And it's interesting that even the lament that is channeled by Odysseus really has as its point of reference the lament of a woman, not of a man. And that's this anonymous widow who is lamenting her husband in particular and her family in general.
Wow, thank you.
Well, thank you for lovely questions. Oh my goodness, you can sense how much I want to go on and on about this, but I bet you're going to cut me off.
I'm cutting you off right now.
Oh, okay, all right, okay.
Thanks, Greg. Thanks, Janet. Thanks, Ellen. Thanks, Sarah.
Thank you all. I had such a good time. It was emotionally cathartic as well as intellectually.
I hope it's the same for everyone watching.
Thank you.
Can't wait to talk to you next time.
I can't wait either.